There's something different about people who generally enjoy their own company. Maybe it's the way they don't panic in silence. Maybe it's how they make decisions without needing constant validation. Maybe it's that they actually look forward to time alone instead of dreading it. Because enjoying solitude didn't just give them peace, it forged a specific type of psychological resilience that neuroscientists are only now beginning to unpack. And by the end of this video, you're going to see why people who thrive in their own company are building some of the most meaningful lives alive today. Let's start with something most people get completely wrong. We're told that solitude is something to fix, that being alone means something went wrong socially. But the people who genuinely enjoy their own company prove that theory dead wrong. They're not lonely. They're not antisocial. They're fundamentally different in how their brains are wired. Picture yourself as a teenager, sitting alone in your room on a Friday night. Not because you weren't invited somewhere, not because you couldn't be out, but because you chose this, the soft glow of a lamp, your own thoughts moving like slow water. No phone notifications to interrupt the quiet. You're completely aware that your friends are doing things without you, and here's what's remarkable. You don't feel the need to fix that. Your internal world is compelling enough. This wasn't rejection, it was preference. Picture this. You're 8 years old. It's Saturday afternoon. The neighborhood is alive with voices and activity, but you're inside. You've built something. A fort from blankets. A world from your imagination. An entire universe exists in the space between these cushions. You taught yourself to entertain yourself. No screens prompting you. No parent directing the play. Just your mind generating endless possibility. This wasn't loneliness. It was apprenticeship. You learn to generate your own dopamine through internal resources rather than external stimulation. You learn that boredom is a temporary state, not a crisis. Psychologists call this developing a strong internal locus of control. But for you, it was just what you did on a Saturday. Here's what's remarkable. You were essentially stress inoculating yourself against the modern addiction to constant stimulation. Your brain was building pathways that would eventually become your greatest advantage. Today's generation reaches for their phone within seconds of boredom. They outsource their entertainment. They panic without external input. But you learned something different. You proved to yourself that your own mind could be enough. That's not a small thing. This wasn't wasting time. It was building yourself. Consider this. You're 13. Your classmates are obsessed with who's going where, who's invited to what party, who's in which friend group. The social hierarchy is everything. And you're noticing something strange about yourself. While they're desperately coordinating plans, you're reading a book in the library and actually enjoying it. You're sketching. You're thinking. You're completely fine with your own company. This wasn't being a loner. It was being selective. You learned that not every social obligation deserved your presence, that your time was valuable, that you could say no without guilt. Here's where it gets interesting. Neuroscience shows that people with high social intelligence often develop what researchers call hypervigilant social awareness. But for you, it meant something simpler. You could read rooms. You understood people partly because you spent time observing rather than constantly participating. You weren't trapped in the urgency of the moment. Your peers needed constant social validation. They felt anxious without the group. But you had discovered something they hadn't. You could choose your moments. You could be alone without feeling abandoned. They saw it as weird. Research suggests it was actually psychological maturity. This wasn't isolation. It was discernment. Picture this. You're 16 and something shifts. Someone leaves. A friendship ends. A family situation changes. Suddenly you're sitting with real loneliness for the first time. Not the chosen kind. The kind that aches. The kind that makes silence feel dangerous instead of safe. This wasn't just pain. It was the moment you learned the difference between solitude and isolation. You learned that enjoying your own company doesn't mean you don't need people. That depth requires vulnerability. That being fine alone doesn't protect you from missing someone. Psychologists call this emotional self-regulation under duress. For you, it was discovering that your strength had limits. Here's what's remarkable. You didn't break. You sat with the feeling instead of running from it. You learned that you could survive loneliness because you built a foundation of genuine self-companionship. Modern psychology suggests that people who can't be alone often can't actually connect deeply either. They're running from themselves into others. But you had practiced being your own friend. So when you hurt, you could stay present with it. This wasn't isolation. It was integration. Imagine you're 19 and you do something alone that most people only do with others. You go to a movie by yourself. You eat dinner alone at a restaurant. You take a solo trip. These seem trivial now, but they rewired something fundamental. This wasn't being antisocial. It was building calibrated risk assessment. You learned that you could navigate the world without a buffer. That your own company was sufficient. that you didn't need someone else to validate the experience. Here's where it gets interesting. Psychologists recognize this as developing strong executive function, but for you, it meant you built competence in 1,000 small situations. You learned to trust your own judgment. You learned that discomfort was temporary. Today's young adults often can't function without a friend present. They outsource their decision-making. They need external validation for basic activities, but you proved to yourself repeatedly that you could do things alone, you weren't dependent, you were capable. This wasn't loneliness, it was mastery. Picture this, you're in your 20s and something becomes clear. While your peers are still seeking approval, you've already moved past it. You know what you want, not what your parents want, not what your friends want, what you actually want. You can sit with that knowing without needing to explain it to anyone. This wasn't arrogance, it was clarity. You learned to trust your own judgment because you'd spent so much time listening to your own thoughts. You developed delayed gratification naturally, not as a discipline, but as a preference. Neuroscientists call this a well-developed default mode network. But for you, it meant you could think without distraction. You could plan without consensus. You could move forward without permission. Your peers often feel paralyzed by indecision. They need others' input. They need doubt their own knowing. But you had a conversation with yourself so often that you actually knew yourself. They're still discovering who they are. You already did that work. This wasn't isolation, it was autonomy. Consider this. You're alone and something physical goes wrong. You're sick, you're injured, you're uncomfortable. And you don't panic because you've learned to sit with discomfort. You've built what researchers call frustration tolerance through years of managing your own boredom and disappointment. This wasn't hardship, it was inoculation. You learned that you could endure difficulty without needing immediate rescue, that you could be your own first responder, that your mind could calm your body. Here's what's remarkable. Studies show that people with strong internal resources recover from physical stress faster than those who immediately reach for external support. Your childhood had taught your nervous system to self-regulate. You didn't need someone else to make the pain better. You could sit with it and let it pass. Today's generation often falls apart when they experience minor physical discomfort. They need attention. They need sympathy. They need someone else to acknowledge their struggle. But you developed what might be called psychological resilience through repeated solo experiences. This wasn't suffering. It was strength building. Picture this. You're 17 and you make a choice that has real consequences. And you face those consequences alone, not because anyone abandoned you, but because some lessons can't be mediated by others. You learned that you were responsible for your own outcomes, that your choices mattered, that there was no version of life where someone else could save you from yourself. This wasn't abandonment, it was accountability. You learned to carry your own weight, to own your mistakes, to learn from failure without deflecting blame. Psychologists call this developing an internal locus of control and strong personal responsibility. But for you, it meant you matured faster than your peers. You couldn't hide from yourself. You couldn't escape into someone else's narrative about what happened. Your peers often blame their circumstances. They externalize their failures. They wait for others to solve their problems. But you learned early that you were your own solution, that your choices cascaded into your reality, that you couldn't wait for rescue. This wasn't loneliness. It was empowerment. Imagine sitting in silence and actually being okay with it. You're waiting for something, an important email, a callback, a decision, and instead of filling the void with distraction, you sit with uncertainty. You've practiced this so many times that you can actually be present with not knowing. This wasn't passivity. It was mastery over time. You learned the waiting didn't require filling every moment, that anticipation could exist without panic, that you could hold space for the unknown. Here's where it gets interesting. Neuroscience shows that people who can't tolerate silence often develop anxiety disorders. Their brains never learn to calm down, but you had years of practice sitting with your own thoughts. Your nervous system knew that silence didn't equal danger. Modern life throws uncertainty at everyone. Job transitions, relationship uncertainty, health questions. People without solitude skills panic. They reach for alcohol, drugs, obsessive checking behavior. But you had built what researchers call delayed gratification through years of being comfortable with your own company. This wasn't suffering. It was patience. Picture this. You're at a party. You don't know many people. Your instinct isn't to immediately attach to the group or hide in the corner. You move through the space with a kind of ease. You're observant. You're present. You're not performing. And here's what's remarkable. People are drawn to you. Not because you're trying, but because you're genuinely interested without being desperate. This wasn't antisocial skill. It was social intelligence. You learned to read people because you'd spent so much time reading yourself. You understood their discomfort because you'd made friends with your own. Psychologists recognize this as hypervigilant social awareness developed through independent observation. But for you, it meant you could navigate complex social situations without a script. You weren't performing a version of yourself. You were actually present. Your peers often feel lost in social situations. They need others to validate their presence. They're anxious without external affirmation. But you'd already spent so much time in your own company that you knew you were enough. That gave you freedom others didn't have. This wasn't loneliness, it was authenticity. Consider this moment. You're completely alone and you're exactly where you want to be. Maybe you're creating something. Maybe you're thinking through a problem. Maybe you're simply existing without agenda. And you realize that your own company has become not just acceptable but genuinely preferable sometimes. You're not running from people, you're choosing yourself. This wasn't isolation, it was integration. You'd learned that the relationship with yourself was foundational to every other relationship, that you couldn't fully show up for others until you'd made peace with being alone. Here's what's remarkable. Research shows that people who genuinely enjoy solitude have lower rates of depression and anxiety than those who constantly need external stimulation. Your brain has been building resilience through years of self-companionship. Modern culture worships busyness and constant connection. Most people are terrified of being alone. They feel like something's wrong if they're not constantly engaged. But you discovered that solitude wasn't a deficit, it was a feature. That being comfortable in your own company was one of the most valuable skills you could develop. This wasn't loneliness, it was wholeness. But some experiences cut deeper than skill building. Consider the quiet moments when you realized that your greatest strength had emerged from your greatest vulnerability. When you were young, maybe you were different. Maybe you didn't fit easily into groups. Maybe you were the kid who preferred books to sports, art to popularity contests, thinking to performing. You felt that difference acutely. There was pain in it. The exclusion, the sense that something was wrong with you because you didn't want what everyone else wanted. And then something shifted. That same difference became your foundation. Your comfort with solitude wasn't a side effect of rejection. It was a gift wrapped in loneliness. You learned to love what you once felt forced to accept. That's the alchemy of growing up different. But that strength existed alongside something harder to name. Because genuinely enjoying your own company doesn't mean you don't get lonely. It doesn't mean you don't want deep connection. It means you've learned to hold both truths, that you're complete alone and that you're enriched by others, that you don't need people out of desperation, which paradoxically makes you better at being with them. You learn to contain multitudes, to be independent without being cold, to be thoughtful without being isolated, to love your own company while still craving genuine connection. That complexity might be your most valuable inheritance. It's rare, it's powerful, and it was forged in solitude. Let's return to where we started. You, alone in your room. But now you understand what that actually means. You're not lonely because you're not afraid of yourself. You're not isolated because you're genuinely interested in your own thoughts. You're not incomplete because you've learned to be your own companion. These people carry something the modern world desperately needs. They remember what it felt like to be entertained by their own minds. They remember Friday nights that didn't require external validation. They remember the peace of not needing to perform. They remember discovering that they were enough. They're living proof that resilience is built, not born. That competence comes from practice navigating situations solo. That the best gift isn't a smooth path protected by constant support, but the opportunity to develop your own resources. In a world of constant noise and connection, they stand as evidence of another way. Not perfect, not without costs, but a way that produced people who can sit comfortably with themselves, people who make decisions from internal knowing rather than external pressure, people who can be genuinely present with others because they're not running from their own company. They grew up learning to love solitude while still valuing connection. And somehow, they learned to hold it all. To be both self-sufficient and deeply relational, to enjoy their own company without being lonely, to build a life that doesn't require constant external validation to feel complete. That's not just psychology, that's wisdom.